let me introduce Jenny Paturyan, Yevgenia Paturyan. She is with us at the American University of Armenia. She is a political scientist, and for the past several years, she's done in-depth research in volunteerism and civil society in Armenia. And hopefully we'll see how her work complements Armine's work on environmental activism. Jenny, please.
Still at this late hour. Yes, thank you. I have an annoying habit of moving around, so do remind me not to do that. Thank you very much, and I'll try to keep it short because I know we're pretty tired. All right, very, very briefly. As Alan has said, indeed, we are at the Paturyan Center for Policy Analysis. We are doing a research on Armenian civil society. It's called 20 Years After Transition, Is It Still Post-Communist? And the idea, starting point, is a work by Mark Howard, who has done extensive work on post-communist region, but not on Armenia. And his arguments in late 90s, where civil society in post-communist countries is specifically weak in terms of low level of trust towards civil society organizations, low membership in civil society organizations, and reliance on informal networks such as friends and relatives instead of formal things when you need to mobilize or get things done. So what we wanted to know with this project is, how about Armenia today? Are we still suffering from this communist legacy of mistrust, disengagement, or has things changed? And if they have changed, then in what way? This is very briefly an overview of our project. It has a 3x3x3 system. We're looking at individual level, as in individual people, how they interact with civil society. We're looking at organizations, and this is something that we are currently involved in. When we look at NGOs, we do a survey of NGOs, and we're doing a little bit of comparison of Armenia towards other countries, with mainly focusing on membership, on trust towards these organizations, and on volunteering. And this is a component that we added to the original framework because we thought if changes are happening in Armenia, that it's got to be outside of the NGO sector, in a little bit in lieu of what Dr. Ishkanian was talking about. So we wanted to look at volunteering. And the last part is like we do 3 different methods actually. We look at data that already exists, mostly Caucasus Barometer by the Caucasus Research Centers. I'm very pleased to see here we use extensively Caucasus Barometer. It's a great source. And we do our own survey, which is ongoing right now. And we also do in-depth interviews with NGO leaders and with volunteers. So very briefly, Caucasus Barometer. What we have already found out through our analysis of the existing information is that trust towards NGOs in Armenia is pretty low. And here you can see a comparison with Georgia and Azerbaijan. And unfortunately, Caucasus Barometer starts from 2008. And you can even see, well, it's too early to say about decline. It kind of goes up and down, but it's certainly not increasing, and it's below Georgia and Azerbaijan. We are less trustful than our neighbors. And if you compare that to Europe in general, we are much less trustful. And I'm not going to do that just not to overload it, but we've got that data that there's still, in that sense, we're still post-communist, and that we don't trust our NGOs. The good news, however, is as we're looking for change, we thought, how can we measure change? And one of the ways you assume that younger generation, the post-communist generation, is going to be different. And this is also, in a way, in lieu similar to Dr. Ishkanian's argument and her research. So what you see in this graph is when we just look at different generations, how much they trust or mistrust NGOs. We can see that the young people, the post-communist generation, those between 18 and 24 years old, they're actually much more trustful. So this green area is people who say they do trust. And if you can compare it, you can see there's still pretty much mistrust as well, all across all the age groups. But it's the young people who are 29%, almost 1/3 of our youth. actually say they do trust NGOs, as compared to older cohorts where these numbers are not that large. Interestingly, they're also the ones who have easier time expressing their opinion. Let me see if I can get this thing out. I hope I don't spoil anything. Okay, better. So you can see that the don't know proportion is also lower among the young. So they're more opinionated. They're at least able to say whether they trust or mistrust NGOs. So in that one instance, we can see that a younger generation in Armenia is different as compared to the older generations. When we look at volunteering, interestingly enough, the picture is somewhat reversed. Because as you saw before, Armenians are less trustful of NGOs. Armenians, however, are more likely to volunteer as compared to our neighbors. And this is the percentage of people who say we do volunteer. And you might think this is not great, but I think it's a start. 1/5 of our people say, yes, occasionally we do volunteer, and that's a pretty big resource if you know how to tap into it. However, interestingly enough, here the young people are not more likely to volunteer. They're just as likely to volunteer as the older cohorts, except the very old people, of course, where the numbers drop down. This is, strictly speaking, not part of our research, but I thought it would be interesting to look at civic activism, because this was the topic of today's presentation. So here what I did is to look at the only source of data we have on Armenia, which is old enough, the so-called World Values Survey, and compare that with modern data. And this is a bit confusing, but I'll try to walk you through. So in World Values Survey, people were asked if they have done any of this activity. Attend a demonstration, sign a petition. Well, no wonder, there are a lot of people who said they have done it, and this is 1995. There are people who said they might do it, and then people would say, we'd never do that. Unfortunately, the Caucasus Barometer question is worded differently. It asks, on a scale from 1 to 10, how likely are you to do that? So we don't know how many have done it in their life, but we do know how many people say, not likely to do that. And I've sort of grouped it into 3 categories to roughly correspond to the 3 categories of the World Values Survey. And I think the only place where you can draw comparison is this. So those are people who said, not likely to do that at all. I think something's missing. That's unfortunate. So here you can see, for example, with attending a rally, 64% are pretty skeptical that or not they're going to be attending a rally at all. And 48% say, I don't think I'm going to sign a petition. So if you look at civic activism, 95 and 2012, to me, it's decreasing, if anything. It's not increasing. So, again, I'm not, in a way that, how does that compare to Dr. Ishkanian's work? I think there's a very good evidence that there are groups that are active, but by and large, the society isn't quite active yet. So it's a question exactly the one that you raised in your report. To what extent will the environmental activists manage to activate the rest of the society? Because this doesn't look great. And the last bit that you see is just another survey by CRC as well, social cohesion. These are people who have done this activity in the past 12 months, and the numbers are simply tiny. We're not demonstrating and we're not signing petitions. Okay, the last, I think, few minutes that I've got, I just want to very shortly introduce the second part of our study. Now, this was analyzing existing data. This is collecting our own original data. We are right now contacting NGOs and asking them to fill in a questionnaire, either online or by phone. We've got 180 responses so far. And if you want to know about the sampling, that's an entirely different story, and we'll be glad to share it, but not within this presentation. So the questionnaire is about 30 questions on a number of issues. And again, what we're trying to understand is there a new breath in this NGO sphere? And the way we're trying to understand it is that we're looking that there is leadership change, because 10 years ago the concern was that these NGOs are run by the same people, and if these people leave, the NGO collapses. So we're trying to understand if there is a leadership change as a sign of institutionalization, but also as a sign of maybe sustainability definitely, but maybe change of values. Not granted, you can have a new leadership acting exactly like old leadership, but you might at least see some change. And we're trying to understand if newer organizations that started late 2000 are in any way different. And again, remember that the whole project is very much about trust. So what we also do is we want to understand that these NGOs are realistic about how much they are trusted or mistrusted. And we ask them the same question like in Caucasus Barometer. And here you can see that they're overly optimistic. So what you see in red is NGOs' opinion about how much they think they are trusted. And the gray is the public opinion of Armenians. And you can see here that, here especially, it's 43% of NGOs felt they are somewhat trusted, whereas if you ask the public, it's just 15%. Also here, there's 17% of our public, almost 1/5, that says we absolutely distrust these NGOs. While NGOs don't even realize it, they think, oh, very few people distrust us. So this shows you that they're not, in a way, they are overly optimistic about how much trust they can rely on. And I think I'm not really going to abuse your patience anymore. So just let's go on the very last slide. This is about how old the NGOs are, what's the leadership, and so on. And we looked at how they work with volunteers. And basically, in a nutshell, there's no difference between all the new NGOs in terms of how much volunteering they tap into it, which is, I thought we would see a difference, that a younger or newer NGOs would be more volunteer driven, but that's not the case. They equally engage volunteers. And this is really the last one I think I want to show you, because I could go on and on about the survey endlessly, so close to my heart. Another thing we want to understand is, are these NGOs using these new social networks and media possibilities? Because again, just like Dr. Ishkanian mentioned, new age, new social media possibilities, new mobilization strategies. So we ask our NGOs if they're using these communication tools, and this is how it looks at the moment. 22% of NGOs have a web page, another 22, but not necessarily. This could be overlapping. It could be the same NGO that has all these things, but basically, 22% have Facebook. People use mailing lists. These things are more unusual. So we can discuss whether this is a lot or a little, and the bulk of the project is still ahead of us, and this is not a parameter where we will look at old versus new NGOs and big versus small, Yerevan versus locations, and so on. But this is another attempt to understand, are NGOs walking in the same speed as the society? Are they tapping into these resources? And I think I really stop here, because I think we are way beyond the schedule. And thank you very much. This has been very, very interesting, and a pleasure for me to meet such an audience.